Hi, my name is Rick Medved, and I've been studying the Exodus for many years. About 15 years ago, I published a book called 1174 BC to identify the true date of the Exodus, and since then, all of the claims have stood the test of time. This is my final video in the series where I lay out all of the evidence. I would encourage people to watch it and let me know if you find it compelling that I have uncovered the true date of the Exodus. Here's that video.
Over the previous 7 episodes, using math and science, we have carefully laid out a new timeline of the Exodus that no historian has ever proposed. But is it accurate? Let's talk about the facts. Firstly, let's point out that this is the only timeline that matches up with the historical record of Egypt in regards to what the Bible describes as the total destruction of the Egyptian military.
The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived.
Historians who study Egypt all agree that in 1175 BC Egypt had the mightiest army in the world. But one short year later, you will not be able to find evidence of a single chariot in Egypt. Look for yourself in the history books. No one can explain this mystery. Secondly, this is the only timeline that actually includes the full lineage of David, including his father Jesse and other forefathers. If you look at any of the timelines that place the Exodus in 1446 BC, you will not find the forefathers of David printed, because it's not possible. Look for yourself, and the same phenomenon exists in these timelines related to the lineage of Moses. You will not find his father printed. But in our timeline, it's a perfect match to the Bible. When asked about these glaring omissions, you will receive little more than blank stares. This is also the only timeline that matches up with Josephus's quote about Ramses the Great.
Ramses the Great, who slew the Israelite infants, and of the inscription on his obelisk, containing, in my opinion, one of the oldest records of mankind.
Josephus tells us that Moses was born during the reign of Ramses II, and this is the only timeline that reflects that fact. It also matches up with the timeline of the Israelites building the cities of Ramses and Pithom, as described in the Bible.
So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh.
Archaeologists have pinpointed the construction of those 2 cities to have been completed around the year 1224 BC. A perfect match to this timeline, as it places the completion date about 50 years before the Exodus, when the Hebrew slaves would be nearing their peak. This timeline also places Jacob's journey to Egypt to have happened in the year 1389 BC, which matches up perfectly with our known history of Egypt during that period of time. It also precisely lines up Joseph with the Pharaoh eye and the Amarna period, when Egyptians served a single god, Aten. Still not convinced? Consider this. Our new timeline places Abraham's journey to Canaan in the year 1604 BC, which is over 400 years later than the traditional year of 2091 BC. While it is difficult for archaeologists to confirm either date, a new discovery might just settle the debate once and for all.
Scientists have found evidence of a cosmic airburst event around 1650 BCE that devastated the ancient city of Tal el-Hammam in the southern Jordan Valley, causing extreme temperatures and depositing high concentrations of salt. This event, potentially inspiring the biblical tales of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Located in the Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea, the settlement had become the largest continuously occupied city in the area, 5 times larger than Jericho. Pottery shards have been found with outer surfaces melted into glass, indicating an extreme high-temperature event. The shock of the explosion was enough to level the city, flattening the palace and surrounding walls. The distribution of bones indicated extreme skeletal fragmentation of its inhabitants. The airburst also created unusually high concentrations of salt, which can be found at the site matching up perfectly with the accounts in the Bible. Scientists estimate the blast to have had the power of 1,000 Hiroshimas, happening exactly where the Bible claims the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah existed, exactly at the time where our timeline shows Abraham to be living. Coincidence? Or added proof that this timeline is correct? Here's another proof. For those holding firm to the 1446 Exodus date, there is yet another mystery that cannot be explained. 11 times in the Bible, Moses makes reference to iron and iron tools. But looking at the history books, iron use did not become widespread until about 1200 BC, another perfect match for the 1174 date. Want to hear some more evidence confirming this new timeline? Consider this verse from Genesis.
Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, "I am a foreigner and stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead."
The story continues about Abraham's dealings with the Hittites. Nothing seems out of place when we read these verses until we open the history books and notice the Hittites didn't exist until around 1650 BC. Once again, this is a perfect fit for our new timeline, which has Abraham moving to Canaan in 1604 BC, but creates quite a conundrum for the traditional year of 2091 BC. How is it possible for Abraham to be talking to Hittites 450 years before they existed? No one will be able to give you an answer to that question. Another stunning match to our timeline, and even more reason to take the position that we have cracked the code of the Exodus dating. Need more proof? Consider this: the Battle of Kadesh. This is the largest chariot battle in history, which happened in May of 1274 BC between the New Kingdom of Egypt and the Hittite Empire. The Egyptians, led by Ramses the Great, pushed up north from Egypt through Canaan, where they met the Hittite armies at the city of Kadesh. This is an extremely well-documented battle which exists in both Egyptians' records and those of the Hittites. But look at the year. 1274 BC would place it almost 200 years into the establishment of Israel according to the traditional timeline, but 100 years before the Exodus according to our timeline. The fact that neither the Egyptians nor the Hittites mention the Israelites seems to suggest they had not yet arrived. And the fact that the Israelite archives fail to mention this historic battle seems to be added evidence that our new timeline is correct. We are talking about the biggest battle of the century happening in Canaan, and the Bible is silent. Isn't that proof that it happened before the Exodus? Now let's talk about the criticisms of this theory. One of the obvious concerns is that the shortened time frame may not give enough time for the Israelites to reach 500,000 in numbers by the time of the Exodus. But these numbers are very much within reach, requiring just 3 male children per family over this span of time, and the Bible provides evidence suggesting the Israelites had very large families at this time in history.
Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread.
Another concern is that both Genesis 15 and Acts 13 make mention of a 400-year period of time that the Israelites were in foreign lands. But there is evidence in the Bible that the 400 years includes both the years in Egypt and the years in Canaan combined, as the Bible refers to the Israelites as strangers of both lands. And about this year, 1446 BC, there is simply no chance of that being the year of the Exodus. There is nothing in the history books that supports the total and complete destruction of the armies of Egypt. If Thutmose III lost his entire fighting force in 1446 BC, how was he attacking Syria in the following year? How was he engaged in 10 additional military campaigns over the next 15 years, expanding his empire in every direction? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? These are questions that have never been answered by people who support the 1446 year. Okay, now let's talk about the Merneptah Stele. This is a tablet inscription that dates to about 1200 BC that some people refer to as evidence for the existence of Israel at this time in history. But there are a lot of problems with this artifact. Out of 28 lines of text, there is a single, very cryptic line that some people believe may contain the word Israel. Other historians dispute that it says Israel at all, but for those who do interpret it that way, it reads, Israel is laid waste. Its seed is no more. The first thing to note is that many scholars dispute that it even contains the name Israel, but the bigger problem is that we simply cannot believe the inscription because at no point of time have all of the people of Israel been wiped out. They continue to this very day, so we should dismiss this artifact outright as there is not a clear consensus about what it means or what it refers to. Now let's move to the final criticism, and this one is the hardest to deal with. Most biblical scholars place the time period of the Judges to be around 400 years based on verses found in the book of Judges, but with our 1174 BC timeline, it's a much shorter period of time. Only about 100 years. But there are reasons to believe the 100-year time span is accurate and 400 years is not. This is going to be a hard pill to swallow for many Christians, but an enormous amount of evidence points to the fact that the stories mentioned in the book of Judges are not meant to be taken literally and are instead simply fictional characters meant to capture the struggle of the Israelites. Let's take a look. For starters, the traditional author of the book of Judges was thought to be Samuel, who lived near the end of the period of the Judges, but that fact is never stated in the book itself. Today, most biblical scholars doubt his authorship and in fact believe it was likely written about 500 to 600 years later during the Babylonian exile. In fact, this is not just a theory, but a fact, as the text itself in the book of Judges makes reference to the time in captivity. It's right there in chapter 18, verse 30. A careful reading of the book of Judges reveals a lot of evidence to support the fact that these stories are fictional as opposed to historical. If we focus on chapters 2 through 16, these are the chapters that talk about the judges, and some curious patterns show up. For one thing, the names of these judges, who are said to rule for as long as 40 years, do not appear in any other books of the Old Testament. And even more strange is that none of the other people from the Old Testament are mentioned in these stories. It is as if this book exists in its own universe. And if we look at the text of the stories, they aren't written like any other books of the Bible. There is a general lack of specific details given. Time frames are reported in large, very round numbers, amazingly grandiose accomplishments listed without explanation or plausibility, and nothing is cross-referenced or corroborated with any other book of the Bible. Doesn't it seem odd that none of these judges are mentioned by any of the prophets, scribes, kings, or even Jesus himself in the Bible? If we are going to be honest with ourselves, we need to admit there is a lack of support for the timelines listed in the book of Judges. For thousands of years, historians and archaeologists have been stumped by the lack of evidence found confirming these 400 years. Is it possible there is a very simple explanation that answers all of the questions and fits perfectly with everything mentioned in every other book of the Bible? Yes, and that answer is that the period of the Judges was much shorter. For the past 1,000 years, Bible scholars have attempted to pinpoint the date of the Exodus, and they have all used the same approach. To start with the Bible verses that mention numbers of years, and then attempt to fit the puzzle pieces together from there. And the results have been the same. A timeline that conflicts with other parts of the Bible, conflicts with Josephus, and conflicts with the historical record of Canaan. So for this timeline, we did something different that had never been attempted before. Ignore the verses with years mentioned and instead start with what we know. The clearly identified lineages of David and Moses, The result is an absolutely amazing timeline that not only matches up perfectly with history, but also, aside from the book of Judges, matches up with every verse of the Bible and Josephus. A true first of its kind. For the first time ever, we have a timeline that correctly matches the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, pinpoints Abraham to the time frame of the Hittites, matches Jacob's journey to a known period of Egyptian wealth accumulation, links Joseph to the Pharaoh Ai of the 18th dynasty, correctly places Moses' birth during the rule of Ramses the Great, and conclusively sets the Exodus in the rule of another pharaoh named Ramses, as mentioned in the Bible. It's the only timeline that perfectly fits the lineage of David, as well as flawlessly matches every verse made by Moses in the first 5 books of the Bible, including the total destruction of Pharaoh's armies. This timeline will hopefully open people's eyes to the fact that the Bible is correct, and history does in fact confirm that the story of the Exodus to be a real event, hidden from the experts, but fully visible to those who have eyes to see. Thank you for watching this series, and please leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to support this research and see more videos like these. Our goal is to see this theory become mainstream. With God, all things are possible.